My name is Jeff Howard. I'm a political philosopher at University College London. I think about ethical questions raised by new digital technologies.
Could you tell me about the time when you changed your mind on a very long-standing belief?
I'll give an answer that connects to my research project. So I believed for a long time that laws banning hate speech were justified. These laws were put in place to protect vulnerable groups from speech that attacked them, that vilified them, that demeaned them. And so it was really important, I felt, to have laws on the books that criminalized the expression of hatred toward vulnerable populations. And over time, I've come to believe, really just in the past year, that these laws are mistaken, they're misguided. And the reason they're mistaken and misguided is because most of what we would want to call hate speech can already be captured by existing recognized categories of unlawful speech. So if you think of a racial minority group in one's country that has been historically oppressed, that we want to therefore protect, the worst kind of speech is speech that incites violence toward that group, or that threatens violence toward that group, or that engages in defamation against members of that group, spreading horrible lies about them that harm them in the community, or that constitutes really unwanted, aggressive, harassing behavior of members of those groups. And then my thought was, oh, but incitement, threats, defamation, and harassment are already recognized as unprotected categories of speech. So why do we need a new category called hate speech? My view is that when you threaten, say, to kill someone, that's obviously very bad, it's wrong, it's potentially harmful. And when you do it to a member of a vulnerable group, it might be even worse than normal because you're having both the initial impact on the individual you're speaking to, and then a wider impact on the broader social group. And that wider impact comes in the form of intimidating that group. And so in a way, hateful threats, you might think, are more harmful than just an ordinary threat against an individual, but we don't need a new category called hate speech to explain that. My view is that you could have aggravated penalties for speech that targets members of vulnerable groups in the same way that a murder motivated by racial hatred, in some places we punish those more harshly than just an ordinary murder. I think you could do that with existing speech crimes, but you don't need a new speech crime called hate speech. And just the last thing to say on that is, if you review the record of the way hate speech laws have been used around the world, they're often used to silence political dissent, to attack people for engaging in merely offensive or insulting speech rather than genuinely harmful speech. And so despite having written a lot about the importance of hate speech laws, I very slowly come around to the view that we don't need them.
Do you have any beliefs that you think you'll never abandon?
I think I'll never abandon my belief in the equality of all human beings. I think it would be very, very difficult to convince me that people should be accorded different moral status based on aspects of their personality or their identity. I find that very, very difficult to accept.
What does it mean to disagree well?
I think disagreeing well is about three things. First, it's about trying to listen to others so that we can understand what they think about an issue. And so to disagree well, you first have to keep quiet and hear what other people have to say. Now, it may be that people aren't just volunteering it, and so you might need to get at it. And so part of active listening is indicating to the person you're talking to an open-minded receptiveness to what they have to say so that they feel comfortable sharing with you. And so the first bit of disagreeing well is about inhabiting this inviting mentality that brings people in, that invites people to share what they think with you, and then really listening to what they say so that you can identify where they're coming from. I think the second part of disagreeing well, so the first bit is about active listening. The second bit about aspect of disagreeing well is about explaining one's own point of view in a respectful way. So if one's own point of view is that, Donald Trump is awful and shouldn't be elected the president of the United States, then there's a way to express that view that demonizes those who voted for him, that says they're evil, that they're traitors, that they're morons. And then there's a way to express that point of view that says, well, maybe you think he's all of those things, but it isn't necessarily true that the people who supported him are vicious in all of those ways. And so it's about trying to explain one's point of view in a way that helps people to understand it rather than just alienates them and puts them on the defense, right? And then the last bit of it is a willingness to just always keep the conversation going and to try to identify points of common ground. So once you've figured out what other people think, and then you've tried to explain to them what you think, it's all on the table. And so hopefully you're able to continue talking to them in a way that helps you identify the points where you actually agree with them.
Do you have any ideas as to what schools or universities could do to promote good disagreement?
I do. One really interesting technique that some have proposed lately is to use generative AI chatbots as a way to get people to practice disagreeing with others. So I think it'll be really interesting to see developments in that space. And I did see some empirical research, a working paper published recently, I can send you the link, that suggested that when you put people who hold conspiracy theories in conversation with chatbots who try to talk them out of the conspiracy theory, that can have a positive effect, which was really interesting to me. So I think there's a way to use technology to develop these skills of disagreeing well. I also just think it's really important that schools have dedicated time, I think in all the classes, to nurture these virtues of constructive dialogue by having students with opposing beliefs talking to one another. You could imagine students writing up a script of a successful disagreement and then presenting it to their colleagues or peers and then having them kind of criticize it or object to it. One of the things I've always done in my classes is to say we're debating, I don't know, what's a good example? Like say we were debating the death penalty. Okay, and we're wondering whether the death penalty is morally justified. I'll break the class into 4 groups, and one group will have the role of defending the view that it is justified. One group will have the role of defending the view that it isn't justified because it's always wrong to kill people. And then a third group will have the role of defending the view that it's not justified, but only because it's fallible and sometimes makes mistakes. And you can't, once you kill an innocent, if you discover that you've executed someone who DNA evidence later exonerated, you can't bring them back. Whereas if they were in prison, you could let them out. And so a more pragmatic argument against the death penalty. And then the fourth group's role was just to come up with questions and objections for the other groups. And I'd assign people to the groups regardless of what they actually believed. And so you had to come up with the best argument for the view you were assigned, regardless of whether you believed it or not. And I think this is very familiar to people who do debate, but I think it's really important to get people in the habit of coming up with what the best argument is for a position, even if it's not their own position.